Badre, forensic psychiatrist and author of Essential Psychopathology and Its Treatment. He is a forensic psychiatrist who's very active on X. And oftentimes I see his posts, I bookmark them, and then verbatim I use his statistics whenever I'm talking to people in the media. So definitely someone you should check out. Follow Nicholas Badre over on X. Totally underrated account. He's excellent. So what we're going to be talking about today is a really horrific case that happened recently. Ronald Exanthus, I think he was 32, 34 at the time, a man with no prior psychiatric history, no prior criminal history, went from, I think it was Indianapolis down to Kentucky, walked into a stranger's house, someone that he never knew before, went upstairs, and he viciously killed a 6-year-old boy by stabbing him multiple times in the back of the head. His sister tried to defend him. He stabbed the sister in the face as well. The father eventually was able to subdue him until the police came by, and he was promptly arrested. Now, the reason this is national news at the moment is I believe Ronald Exanthus has just been released. He's not in prison anymore. He's been released after about 7 years for killing this 6-year-old boy. Nico Badre, how the hell does something like this happen?
Uh, um, how does something like this happen? I do this a lot. I do a 200 plus forensic evaluation a year, and I'm often surprised that it's hard for me to even predict what kind of outcomes we get in cases. Sometimes something really tragic happens, and you get a sort of a feeling like this should be punished differently, and you get situations where really tragic event end up with individuals being released on either probation or directly with just the time that they waited for trial. It's not, if you look at enough cases, this happens. But oftentimes it is cases like this where the media has a reaction or society has a reaction that actually involves into changing laws. Oftentimes, we could go back to how do we get the insanity laws that we have today, which were very relevant in this case. It had to do with a famous case, the case being John Hinckley trying to assassinate President Reagan. Those kind of big events oftentimes make society ask itself, do we have the right mix of laws? Do we have the right insanity sort of statutes to be able to deal with issues that happen in the world?
Do you believe this was a miscarriage of justice from what you know about this case?
I don't know. Want to let me tell you something. Oftentimes, psychiatry trainees come to me and they want to get supervision. They want to learn how to do forensic work. It's kind of exciting. It's kind of important. And a lot of times when they come to me, they say, I ask them, why are you interested in forensic work? Why are you interested in working in the courts? And they will say something like, I want to do advocacy. I think that there are too many mentally ill in prisons, or I think they're too mentally ill in on the street that are punished or not punished, or whatever angle you sort of may come with your sort of prior history and background. And I often tell them, like, look, this is not the job. The job here is not for me to say, this should be the right outcome. This is how much punishment there is. I think our job in psychiatry or as scientists is to provide the court with information. Is to say, look, this is how we look at this case. Those are the questions you're asking yourself. So society is asking itself, how do we punish this guy after what happened? And those are the tools that we can bring. My personal opinion on it, I mean, of course I have one. It seems kind of surprising. It seems kind of almost tragic how, little punishment there is. And I say that as a human being, but that doesn't affect me when I do my work. I want to provide the court with answers to the question that the court has.
You know, this, I think to be in a functioning society, we need to have punishments that deter crime. And when I looked at the facts of this case, and I've spent the day reading up on it, what I see is, yes, no criminal history. We can put that aside. This was someone who, had
No,
never
no,
been in
no,
trouble
no.
with the
It's
police.
it's not so clear. It's not so clear. That was actually a point of debate in the case.
Oh,
So it was argued that he had no criminal history. And that was a quite important factor for the expert. So the expert said, and a lot of times this happens, you have a really tragic incident, and people will say it happened out of the blue. And out of the blue really reinforces this idea that, of course, it could not have been his own will. Of course, it was because of mental illness. That will often be important. Now, one of the things that sometimes people don't realize is that courts sometimes are very limited in what kind of prior criminal record you're allowed to bring to a case. Now, in this case, you are correct. I'm sort of being a bit finicky here. He did not have a criminal record. However, my understanding of some of the case that happened and how it went to appeals, one of the important questions in this case was, could they bring up the fact that he had actually injured a prior child of his? I believe that he had a young child and a prior marriage that he hurt violently and that they got injured from it. I don't know quite the detail. The appeals are not, the information is not there, but you would think that is quite an important thing. Now, I understand that from a
I think everyone would think it's an important thing. He murders a child and he has a history of child abuse in the past.
exactly. And so when one of the big questions that we ask ourselves as forensic evaluator is, was there an other explanation? Is there an alternative motive? And of course, when you hear guy drove from Indiana to Kentucky, doesn't know the family, goes into a random place and kills a child, of course your brain goes to, there's no possible explanation. Because to some degree, as law-abiding citizens, our reaction is to be so, it's such a foreign thought that we kind of make that mental illness. We kind of like other it in a way that it feels like mental illness. However, had there been a big discussion about what happened in that prior incident, my understanding is when there was only, I think, one forensic psychiatrist who evaluated him. When that forensic psychiatrist asked him, he denied any prior violence. It's not clear to me, I didn't get to see his report on how, how would that affected him. But, if you, when I do a forensic evaluation in a case like this, and you sort of minimize or potentially lie about prior violent incident, especially on something related, that's a big problem because so much of insanity, so much of mental illness, the way we diagnose relies on us trusting the person. Right? I mean, your whole thing
Yes.
about like helping people come off meds is because of your strong relationship with them. If they don't trust you, if they don't relate to you, it's so hard to do the job. For
So,
insanity,
so
somebody is asking us for the biggest price. It's like we want to not be found guilty. You need to be really a perfect defendant oftentimes.
So we have a guy who lies about having abused a child in the past, who then claims to have this insanity defense. So that already sort of undercuts it. It makes it seem like, could he have just been faking it? I want to put that aside for a second. Let's just say, for instance, that he truly was out of his mind, and some things fit that. I mean, driving, across the state to, across state lines to a family you've never heard before. I mean, some of the reports as well from his girlfriend were saying that, he was erratic, he was not acting himself. And so let's say there's some mania or psychosis going on. Now, the thing that really got under my skin about this case was that he was known to be a synthetic cannabis user. And so here we have a guy who's probably employed at some kind of job who is using fake cannabis so he can pass drug tests. So, he can be high and not get caught. I'm presuming that's why he's doing. That's why most people use the fake stuff. And we already know that cannabis has been associated with brutal, like stabbings. For instance, and I'm going to look this up right now. Are you familiar with that case in Colorado where that where the lady was high on cannabis and she killed her
It's in
dog
California.
and she stabbed that? Oh, is
She
that in
killed her
California?
boyfriend. I believe it's in California.
Yeah,
Bryn Spersberg, something like that.
Bryn
I'm
Specia.
butchering.
Bryn Specia. So we have a case. Bryn Specia never smoked cannabis before ever. Goes over to her boyfriend's house and he packs a bong for her or something like that. She has a couple hits, and like that, she ends up, before she knows it, she's stabbing in the face multiple times. She kills her beloved dog, and then she starts stabbing herself in the neck. She's stabbing herself so hard that they have to break her arm to subdue her. So her arm gets broken when the police come there, completely out of her mind. All right. So she's convicted of manslaughter. It's a shorter sentence. A lot of these things come into it, that she didn't get the cannabis. It wasn't her idea. She smoked it anyway. But here we have this guy, Ronald Exanthus, smoking synthetic cannabis known to make people psychotic and aggressive. How can you even get an insanity defense when you're willingly ingesting a recreational drug that can make you manic and psychotic and potentially kill someone? Like, what the hell is going on?
So my reading of the case, reading of the record on it, is that this was not made a big deal of, and I'm a bit surprised. Now, some of that may be a bit like now we have more knowledge than we did in 2018, I believe, about the psychotic effect of cannabis. Though I would say that within forensic psychiatry, or even within psychiatry, 2018 is not that long ago. Like we were quite concerned with cannabis-induced psychosis. I want to say, even in the early 2010s, it was well known.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was in 2015 when I first started training in psychiatry. You would see all of these people with K2, synthetic cannabis-induced psychosis in the ICU. They were that psychotic. They were giving ketamine, propranolol. They were giving like anesthetic agents because they were so out of their mind. So it's hard for, like, was this just a big flub? Did the prosecution just fail at their job to not make a bigger deal out of the fact that this guy was a frequent user of a drug that can make you manic and psychotic?
My understanding is that the prosecution did not have their own psychiatric expert. I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in our field, maybe not you and me, that are kind of doubtful about. I mean, you still see articles written in our field from psychiatrists saying that the concern about psychosis are overblown with cannabis. I find that concerning kind of thing to say. I was once somebody who was certainly in favor of libertarian ideals of letting people make choices. The actual consequences in our emergency departments, in our jail, of people using high dose THC have been quite poor, and so I do find it very concerning. And I think it was certainly something that when I looked at the case, I was very concerned about.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any argument that the cannabis was not volitional. And so how do we deal with this? I can give you some of the arguments that probably the expert thought of, but it's not going to be super compelling stuff, I suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're going to say something like, this was, oh, cannabis isn't that bad. Everyone smokes cannabis. Who knew? But then the converse is even more ludicrous. We have a guy with no prior history of mental illness suddenly becoming psychotic at age 32. Does that sound like typically what happens in schizophrenia or mania, that just like this? To me, that's unlikely. Usually I'm seeing, psychosis occur in your late teens, early 20s.
Especially in
Bipolar can be
males.
a little bit more. Yeah, bipolar is a little bit more up and down, but mostly it's something that's happening in young adulthood. It's not all of a sudden, coming out of the blue, at age 32 rapidly and with like aggression. Yes, there's an increased risk of violence with schizophrenia and mania, but not this kind of violence. Like, maybe this has happened sometimes, but that's not what a lot of schizophrenics and manic people look like. They're not going into houses and stabbing people to death with knives. To me, I mean, it just reeks of a substance-induced psychosis. And I'm just, I mean, that's my thinking. I mean, what other excuse could there have been to diminish the role that his synthetic cannabis use was playing a
I
part in
think
this?
an argument that the expert probably considered is, and this is, I think, a mistake that a lot of psychiatrists do, which is, after he was in jail, he kind of appears psychotic for like a couple of months after. And some people take the mistaken belief that if you're still psychotic, the second the drug screen is clean, or the second you're no longer like high, then it's not substance induced. I think that's just a
Mhm.
misunderstanding of what psychosis is. Like, to me, it's very common that you have a psychotic break that starts from substance, and then it goes on well past the substance is out of your body. I see that all the time. When I was the main psychiatrist at the San Diego jails, I would see that regularly. It's certainly something you see.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and I'm going to jump around a little bit now because we're going to talk about another case. To me, that is the weakest thing ever, because I think any psychiatrist, worth their salt, they've seen this. Like any training psychiatrist usually has seen a drug-induced psychosis. Well, yeah, sometimes from methamphetamine. It could even be an SSRI. Even when you stop that drug, it's quite common for that person to have residual manic symptoms. Sometimes, like, it's quite common for me to see it for 2 months afterwards. I've also treated a lot of people with substance-induced psychosis who are still having residual paranoia, like up to a year, sometimes even 2 years later. I believe that sometimes when you have these psychotic reactions to these medications, it's harmful in some way. And so I mean, I think this is a loophole that the defense is trying to they're trying to take advantage of, but I don't think there's any grounds for that. Constantly, we see chemical insult, psychosis lasting, for some time afterwards. I mean, that's what I see.
I think, let me put it, maybe, give a bit of, is there a limit to that thought? If you told me there was an 18-year-old that would have never become schizophrenic or psychotic if it wasn't for cannabis, and now he's 40 years old, hasn't used in 10 years, and still getting psychotic episode, maybe you want to be a bit forgiving that new psychotic episode at age 40, it's a different thing. And so sometimes you use
Mhm.
this term in court, it's called settled mental illness. So it's no longer the drug, it's its own thing. The question to me
Mm.
is, settled mental illness is not like 2 weeks after you stop using. It's like years later.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. I mean, this reminds me of the James Holmes case. Are you familiar with
Oh,
James Holmes and the Aurora mass shooting?
yeah, the
Yeah.
forensic
For those
psychiatrist wrote
listening
a
right now,
wrote a book about it, a night in Aurora, I think it's called.
was that Resnick or was it a different one?
I don't think that was Resnick. I could try to
Yeah,
find it right now. Uh,
yeah. So, I mean, for the people listening who aren't familiar with this case, James Holmes, a PhD student at University of Colorado at Aurora, um, I think dressed up as the Joker and walked into a Batman screening. I think he killed like 12 people, something like that, maybe injured like 50. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it was one of the worst mass shootings that had ever taken place. Um, they were pretty much ready to throw the book at him. He was going to get the death penalty. He ended up getting off by not guilty by reason of insanity. But the thing
did
that
he
was
get
very
insanity? I
interesting
thought
about
he
this,
didn't get insanity. Maybe we'd have to check. I'm sure he did the insanity defense. I don't think he got it.
yeah, let me see. Did
James Holmes get insanity?
yeah,
Uh,
I thought
no, I
he
don't think
did.
he. I don't think he did. No,
No,
because
no.
that's my understanding. He had this book where he was arguing that I think killing people would somehow give him points. I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm explaining what the argument of Mr. Holmes was, and I believe that within that book there was some mention of understanding that it was bad, and therefore the evaluator had come to the opinion that it did not meet criteria for insanity.
Yeah. Well, thank you for clearing that up. You're absolutely right. The interesting thing was BBC Panorama eventually went back and they did a documentary on this. You can actually search it. You can search on Google, Vimeo, A Prescription for Murder. And I think it's a must watch for people. And the reason they did this is because a very famous psychiatrist, David Healy, was actually called to interview James Holmes. And so while all these forensic experts are coming in, David Healy comes in as well. And what he finds is that James is put on Zoloft, and then his dose is increased from 50 to 100. And I think it's within like a week or two, his behavior starts to drastically change. He starts to send flirtatious messages to another PhD student, and he just becomes increasingly psychotic after that. I think everyone has seen the very notorious pictures. His hair is dyed red. At the end, he's wide-eyed. He's wearing contacts with like almost demon-like, kind of eyes completely blacked out. Really, really freakish and bizarre. And David Healy says that the temporal relationship between when he got put on the medication and when the dose was increased and the mania that came after, he actually believes that this was drug induced. And the argument used by Resnick, well, I don't know if he actually testified in that case, but he is in the A Prescription for Murder documentary. Resnick says in that case, well, James had been off the medication for, what is it, 3 weeks or something before the event happened. And so it turns up then again like, oh, well, he was off the medication. It happened 3 weeks later. There's no way this could have been, drug induced. I question that a little bit because I'm also someone that thinks that these medications potentially are involved in these mass acts of violence. And so do you have any thoughts on that case?
When it comes to the medication thing, I think there's two things that are sort of like being conflated. I think that when somebody like me and you say we are concerned, sometimes psychiatrists will come back and be like, "Well, the evidence is not there." I'm not saying that. I mean, even the way you phrased it, you didn't say this is the case. You said there's a potential here, and I think that when we were using antidepressant on 1% of United States, it was a relatively small number of people, and maybe we weren't getting those kind of side effects that are pretty rare. But now that we're talking about 10% plus, 15 potentially percent of Americans on antidepressants, I think that we're getting like different things, and I think it does change the math on the risk. And I think it is something that is worthy of exploration. And I think when we
Mhm.
know that there are certainly some people that get suicidal, and we have all those articles on psychiatry about how suicide is some form of like self-homicide, to think that there is absolutely no reason to even consider, to even look, and that the message that we need to put out there is safe, is effective. Why? Why? What are we promoting antidepressant? Are we promoting science? And I think that our
Well, that's
role.
exactly what they're doing. They're promoting, the people out there, and this is what I see happening. You get a couple, you know, you get a couple of these academics out there, and they'll say, well, we've got this epidemiological study that kind of jumbles up all of this gang violence, with actual school shootings, and they say, well, when we jumble all these things together, we're not seeing that there's a increased relative risk of mass homicide in the perpetrators. It's bad statistical evidence, and then they completely ignore the fact that all of these drugs, practically all of them, say violence, irritability, aggression in the labels. So we already know they're in the drug labels, and then they just ignore the fact that we've got all of these legal cases out there where juries and judges have found that these drugs have been involved in violence, homicide, murder, suicide. And then we stack on top of that the fact that it's likely over $1 billion in settlement claims for SSRI litigation, whether it's in suicide or violence. I kid you not, check that fact. You can look that up. It's close to $1 billion in
Wow.
settlements, essentially to stifle people, to control the narrative, to make sure they don't get a negative verdict. I mean, to me at this point, it's not like, I mean, it's so clear. But then you get these people that they come on and they say things like, "Well, we don't want to scare the public away from these life-saving drugs." Are you fucking kidding me? Because these like life-saving drugs, especially in the youth, they cause more suicide, and we really don't know what's happening long term with these medications. I think the tide is turning. I think people are waking up now, but yes, yeah, I'm glad we're finally able to have these discussions.
I think that we should. I think that the medications are widespread enough and are used for such longer time that we had expected. And sometimes you'll see me on Twitter like mention some like really old article from the 50s. And I point out like antidepressants were used for like a couple of weeks. And the person gets off and then it's gone. I think that, could you create a scenario where I'm speaking much more sympathetically about antidepressant? You totally can. You totally can create like scenarios where like, where it's reserved to like a small percentage of the population, it's used for a more targeted period, for a shorter period, you can totally hear me say very positive things about antidepressant and how it's improved people. But when it's being used so widely, and that we have this need to just protect them all the time, I just don't see it. I recently posted about how uh, 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 there was this whole question about SSRIs and even Tylenol in pregnancy. And what
Hmm.
they were doing, and it's relevant to what you were saying about epidemiological studies, is they were doing those confounders. And in particular, they were doing this thing called the sibling analysis, where the mother may have used with one sibling, but not with the other. And I was trying to point out that when you do that, you reduce the number of people in the study, and some of the studies are enormous. They're like, there's like North European studies with millions of people, and you've reduced that pool of people because now you need to only find mothers who used SSRI with one child but not the other, and you went from 1 million to like 100, and then you say, oh, there's no more statistical significance, like that means anything, when in reality, with 100 people, you could never create statistical significance. And so the post I had was about how cigarettes and Depakote, when you do sibling analysis, don't show teratogenic effects. And I was like,
Yeah.
we can create scenarios that it will always look a certain way. I think it's relevant to study this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the gig is up. I think it's very clear that people are realizing where a lot of these academics their bread is buttered now. So, when healthcare is the biggest industry in the U.S. It's $4.9 trillion. It's times the size of the defense budget, and the pharmaceutical industry is the lion's share of that. The amount of money these companies have to platform doctors that they who are sympathetic to their cause, to help them with their careers, to kind of get them on the news and all of that. Following COVID, people are waking up and realizing that these experts are compromised because, if we talk about, okay, you're talking about Tylenol and autism. If we start talking about SSRIs and autism, they play these epidemiological games all the time. But you know what people would want to hear? They'd want to hear that there's been systematic reviews of multiple different animal studies where they're actually doing placebo-controlled trials, randomized placebo-controlled trials. They get the group of mice, they put them on SSRIs when they're pregnant, and then there's another group, and they don't. And what do they see? They see an increase in autistic-like behaviors and decreased sexual interest when those young mice grow up. And yes, you could say, well, they're just mice. Who knows whether that translates to humans? But I think for most women out there and most Americans listening, they would say, well, that's concerning. That's, yes, okay, there's some uncertainty in the epidemiology right now. But what we're seeing in these mice, which we've decided are pretty good proxies for humans, reasonable proxies for testing pharmaceuticals. We do it all the time. Well, that's pretty concerning. I think the public's finally waking up to it. They're realizing that these so-called experts, who are meant to be protecting the public, have they're protecting drug companies. They're protecting their reputation. They're trying to protect their profession. They've strayed so far just from their oath to just stand for what is true and right. So I think it's a sad state of affairs. I love Bobby Kennedy. I love the Maha movement, and I think they're actually pushing for real change right now.
I can tell you,
Yeah.
I live in a very blue area of the country, and when I talk to parents here, they're very attracted to a lot of the things that the Maha is saying about being healthier, about being more natural, about trying not to use medications at first, about trying to be resilient and care about your needs, about trying to be physically looking healthy and exercising. I think a lot of those things are compelling to a lot of people.
Yeah. All right. So Nico, we're going to wrap now. I want to thank you so much for coming on. Any final words before we end the stream?
Look, when it comes to forensic psychiatry, a lot of this stuff is super complicated, and we spend a lot of time trying to look at the facts of the case to provide jurors and judges the best information that we can. We want them to be educated, to try to be able to make what they feel is the right decision. I think we should try to do that, whether it's in this particular case or in all the cases that we see. Thank you very much,
Cool.
Joseph.
Yeah, no worries. Well, let me just share something else. As you can see, the power in my room went out from a room short, but I'm still here, kind of in this cave. What I want to say is, because I was just thinking this at the time, that prosecutor in Kentucky needs to be fired. They've done a terrible job in dropping that relationship between the cannabis and the psychosis that happened. I hope that happens. And the last thing that I want to say is, everyone, go out and buy Nico's book, Essential Psychopathology and Its Treatments. He's one of the best forensic psychiatrists I've ever come across. He makes a lot of sense. He's brave. And if you want to support what I think is a totally underrated Twitter account, go to Nicholas Bardray. I'm constantly bookmarking his posts just for the quality in there, and you guys should all give him a support. So on that note, Nico, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on and speaking with me and my audience.
I really appreciate it. You take care.